Some moments on a film set feel rehearsed, even when they're not. This one didn't. The cameras had just stopped rolling on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, dust still hanging in the air, when something shifted between Paul Newman and Robert Redford that no one had planned and no one dared interrupt. It wasn't in the script, it wasn't in the blocking, and yet the crew went still, as if an invisible boundary had been crossed and everyone felt it at once. You have to understand the weight of that silence. These were not uncertain newcomers testing limits. They were rising icons, men whose ease usually relaxed a room. So why did grips freeze mid-step and a boom operator hold his breath? What passed between them in those unscripted seconds felt too real, too exposed to belong to performance alone. Sometimes the most revealing moments arrive when the scene ends and the masks should drop. Instead, something else steps forward, raw, unguarded, impossible to ignore. And if you had been standing there, watching that ripple spread, you might have sensed it too, a line crossed without a word. On that production, hierarchy was not an abstract idea. It was felt in every decision, every pause before someone spoke. Paul Newman arrived not just as an actor, but as a proven box office force, a man whose name could steady financiers and calm a nervous studio. Crew members watched him for cues, directors measured their tone around him, and even silence seemed to defer to his presence. Authority has a gravity, and on a set carrying the weight of a major Western epic, Newman was its center of mass. Across from him stood Robert Redford, undeniably gifted, yet still negotiating his place in the industry's hierarchy. He had the looks, the instinct, the quiet intensity that suggested longevity, but promise is not the same as power. Each take carried an invisible question. Was he matching the legend beside him, or merely orbiting it? When you have ever stepped into a room where everyone already knows who matters most, you understand that tension, the careful calibration of confidence and restraint, the urge to assert yourself without overreaching. Newman's ease could read as mentorship or as dominance depending on the moment. A note delivered lightly might feel like guidance or like a reminder of rank. Redford listened, adjusted, absorbed, aware that the film's success would bind their reputations together while still judging them separately. The studio had invested heavily, the schedule was tight, and the narrative leaned on the chemistry between outlaw charm and restrained cool. If that balance failed, the entire production would tilt. This is how pressure accumulates, not through confrontation, but through glances, timing, and the unspoken calculus of respect. You perform, you adapt, you measure every reaction, because the line between collaboration and competition can be thinner than pride allows you to admit. And somewhere in that charged space, admiration and ego begin to braid together, tightening with each passing day. The set kept moving, scenes completed, laughter returning between takes, yet beneath the professionalism, something was building, quiet and undeniable, waiting for the moment when composure would no longer be enough. Think about the weight of being seen, truly seen, by someone who has already conquered the terrain you are still mapping. It can steady you, or it can expose every uncertainty you hoped to hide. Redford carried himself with composure, yet inside there is always a negotiation. How much deference earns trust, and at what point does restraint begin to erase you? Newman, seasoned and perceptive, could sense that negotiation without a word being spoken. Respect flowed both ways, but respect does not cancel comparison, it sharpens it. Each shared frame became a silent proving ground where timing, tone, and stillness were evaluated not by critics, but by the man standing inches away. And when pressure lingers long enough, it stops feeling external and starts rewriting who you believe you must be. That is when small moments carry unusual weight, when a glance can challenge identity and a pause can test loyalty. You feel. It happened during a sequence everyone believed they had already mastered. The rhythm of the scene was familiar, the timing rehearsed, the camera placements predictable enough that even the extras knew when to breathe. Then, somewhere between action and the expected beat, Paul Newman shifted the tempo.
He leaned into a line that had always been delivered with a wink of charm and let it land with an edge that hadn't existed before. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not listening closely, yet the tone carried a sharpened confidence, as if the moment no longer belonged entirely to the script.
Redford's response came a fraction too late to be accidental. His eyes narrowed, not theatrically, but with the quick recalibration of someone deciding in real time whether to yield or to answer. Instead of following the practiced cadence, he stepped forward into Newman's space and returned the line with an improvised inflection. Cooler, drier, unmistakably deliberate. It wasn't louder, it wasn't overt, but it altered the balance between them, shifting the scene from effortless partnership to something closer to contest. No one called cut. The director let the camera roll, perhaps sensing that something honest was unfolding, perhaps unsure whether interrupting would break a fragile current. A grip later said he felt the air tighten. The script supervisor stopped writing. Even the horses seemed to hold still. This was no longer about dialogue, it was about territory. Then came the risk that sealed it. Newman, deviating from the rehearsed movement, mounted with a speed that suggested instinct rather than choreography, forcing Redford to adjust mid-motion to stay aligned with the frame. It was safe enough, but it demanded trust, reflex, and a willingness to be caught unprepared. Redford followed without hesitation, yet the split second of recalculation was visible, not to the audience, but to everyone who understood how precisely these moments were designed. When the take ended, there was no immediate laughter, no easy release. Newman offered a half-smile that could have meant respect, challenge, or nothing at all. Redford nodded once, controlled, unreadable. The crew resumed movement, but more carefully, as if something delicate had been set in motion. And if you had been standing there, you might have asked yourself the question that lingered in the quiet. Did he mean to do that, or did something unspoken simply rise to the surface when the performance stopped pretending to be safe? What most people saw in that moment was tension, a flicker of rivalry, a veteran asserting dominance, a younger star refusing to yield. But later, when dailies were reviewed and fragments of behind-the-scenes footage surfaced, the moment began to tell a different story. The camera that stayed rolling after the cut captured something quieter. Newman, stepping slightly out of frame, watching Redford with an attentiveness that did not resemble victory. It looked more like evaluation, even concern. Listen closely to the rhythm of what unfolded. Newman's altered delivery had drawn Redford forward, forcing him to claim space rather than defer. The improvised movement demanded adjustment, yes, but it also pulled Redford into a stronger visual position, placing him squarely in the frame's emotional center. What appeared in the moment like an overstep had subtly shifted the scene's balance in Redford's favor. Crew members later recalled Newman asking the director whether the take gave Redford enough presence, not privately for praise, but practically, like a craftsman ensuring the structure would hold. That question reframes everything. Was the edge in his voice a challenge or an invitation? Was the risk a display of control or a deliberate test designed to harden trust under pressure? And consider Redford's response, the choice not to retreat, not to laugh it off, but to meet the moment fully. Something in him recognized the opening. Growth rarely announces itself politely. It arrives disguised as discomfort. In stepping forward, he wasn't defending territory, he was stepping into ownership. This is the paradox that rarely makes headlines. Mentorship does not always look gentle. Sometimes it arrives disguised as friction, as pressure that feels personal before it reveals its purpose. Newman understood the camera, the frame, the invisible alchemy that turns chemistry into legend. Elevating his partner did not diminish him, it completed the story they were telling together. When you re-watch the footage with this lens, the silence on set reads differently. It wasn't shock alone, it was recognition, the sense that something authentic had surfaced, something unscripted yet essential. The crew witnessed a recalibration, a transfer of weight that strengthened the partnership rather than dividing it. How often do we misread pressure as opposition when it is in fact preparation? How often do we interpret a difficult moment as ego when it is an invitation to expand into who we are becoming? What the cameras caught was not a boundary being violated, but one being redrawn, not to separate, but to hold both men more powerfully within the same frame. Long after the set emptied and the noise of the day dissolved into desert quiet, the moment lingered between them. It did not live in headlines or daily reports. It lived in the unsettled awareness that something real had surfaced beneath performance. That night, whether by phone or in a corner far from the crew, the distance between veteran and rising star narrowed into something more human. Newman spoke first, not with the authority everyone recognized, but with the candor rarely witnessed. He admitted he had pushed the moment further than planned, not to dominate, not to prove anything, but to see whether the trust between them could hold under pressure. He had seen Redford's restraint in earlier takes, the instinct to defer out of respect, and he understood how easily respect can silence presence. The scene needed both of us, he confessed in essence, not one leading and the other following. Redford listened, the tension he had carried all day slowly releasing its grip. He acknowledged the jolt he felt when the rhythm changed, the flash of uncertainty that forced him to choose between retreat and response. In that instant, he realized he wasn't reacting to Newman the legend. He was answering a partner who expected him to stand fully in the frame. What felt like a line being crossed had in truth been a line being offered.
There's a particular kind of vulnerability when men speak without performance, when pride loosens enough to make room for honesty. They did not dramatize the moment. They named it. Newman respected him too much to protect him from pressure. Redford respected him enough to meet it without resentment. Beneath the exchange lived a recognition that trust is not proven through comfort, but through the willingness to risk misunderstanding for the sake of something greater. Think about how rarely we receive that kind of challenge in our own lives. Most people either compete with us or protect us. Few invite us to expand. In that quiet conversation, the narrative shifted from hierarchy to partnership. The veteran was not guarding territory. The rising star was not defending ego. They were building a shared standard. By the time the call ended, the silence that had settled over the set earlier that day had been reinterpreted. The line that seemed crossed was no longer a boundary violated, but a threshold stepped over together. And in that crossing, something steadier replaced uncertainty, the knowledge that trust had deepened into respect, and trust had made them braver inside the same frame. On the surface, it looked like a small breach of protocol, a playful step beyond the neat boundaries of a script everyone else was carefully honoring. Yet moments like that rarely stay small. They linger in the air between two people, testing trust, revealing instinct, and quietly asking a question: can we risk being real with each other here? When Paul Newman and Robert Redford crossed that invisible line during the making of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, what emerged was more than spontaneity, it was recognition. One sensed in the other a creative courage, a willingness to lean into uncertainty rather than retreat to safety, and that recognition changed everything. Think about the partnerships in your own life. How often are they defined not by grand declarations, but by one unguarded moment when masks slip and authenticity replaces performance? On that set, laughter and risk dissolved the hierarchy that can so easily exist between stars. In its place grew a rare equality, two men discovering that collaboration could be a shared adventure rather than a negotiated truce. The camera captured charm, but behind the lens, something deeper settled into place: trust without calculation. Years later, when they reunited for The Sting, audiences saw effortless chemistry and assumed it was magic. But magic rarely appears without a beginning. The ease, the timing, the playful confidence, these were dividends paid from an earlier emotional investment.
That first crossing of boundaries had proven they could rely on one another's instincts. They could improvise without fear of embarrassment. They could fail safely. And in creative work, that safety is oxygen. Nostalgia invites us to imagine Hollywood friendships as fleeting, yet their bond endured decades, carried not by publicity, but by mutual respect and shared values. Each man pursued his own path, Newman with his philanthropy and quiet moral conviction, Redford with his commitment to independent storytelling and artistic freedom, yet they remained linked by an understanding forged in that early moment of risk and recognition. It became a touchstone, a private reminder of what is possible when ego loosens its grip and presence takes over. What if the turning points in our lives are rarely announced? What if they arrive disguised as playful defiance, as laughter, as the courage to step 1 inch beyond expectation? History often crowns the finished work, the awards, the box office success, but the true pivot happens earlier, in a moment invisible to everyone else. That day on set did not just shape a film, it shaped a partnership, a friendship, and a creative legacy that still echoes. And maybe that is the quiet lesson. When authenticity meets trust, the future rearranges itself around that truth. Stories about famous friendships can feel distant, like artifacts sealed behind glass, admired but untouched. Yet beneath the mythology, the moment we witnessed was not reserved for movie stars or Hollywood sets. It belongs to anyone who has ever shared work, risk, or silence with another human being. Because sometimes the line that gets crossed is not a boundary of disrespect, but a boundary of fear. And when fear gives way, something far more enduring can take its place. When one person dares to step beyond the expected script, they're not always challenging authority. Often they are testing trust. They're asking without words, are we safe enough to be real here? In healthy partnerships, that small deviation becomes a signal. I believe you can meet me in authenticity. I believe we can improvise without breaking. What looks like rebellion from the outside can be intimacy on the inside. You have likely felt this in quieter settings, a colleague who speaks honestly in a tense meeting, a friend who interrupts your polished story to tell the truth you were avoiding, a sibling who laughs when everyone else stays formal. In those moments, the room shifts, pretense loosens, connection deepens, and you realize that trust is not built through perfect behavior, but through shared permission to be human. So the question is not whether lines will be crossed in our relationships. They will be. The deeper question is what those crossings reveal. Do they expose disrespect, or do they reveal safety? Do they fracture connection, or invite it to mature? When someone risks authenticity with you, do you tighten control, or do you lean in and meet them there? There is a quiet nobility in choosing trust over ego. It requires releasing the need to dominate the moment, and instead honoring the relationship within it. When we respond with openness rather than defensiveness, we elevate the space we share. We transform transactions into partnerships, performances into presence, and guarded interactions into living, breathing connection. Maybe that is the invitation hidden in this story. Notice the next moment when someone steps slightly beyond expectation with you. Pause before judging. Ask what trust is being offered. Consider what might grow if you receive it with courage. And if this reflection resonates, carry it into your conversations, your collaborations, your family table. Because every relationship strengthens when authenticity is welcomed, and every community deepens when trust is returned. Perhaps the true measure of a life is not how carefully we stay within the lines, but how wisely we step beyond them when love, respect, and shared purpose invite us forward. Think about the mentors who believed in you before you believed in yourself, the friends who challenged you to grow, the moments when honesty felt risky yet liberating.
These are the crossings that shape identity. These are the risks that build belonging. And when you choose trust in return, you quietly become the safe place someone else has been searching for all along.